Our hearts go out to everybody who was affected by it. I've actually made a couple of phone calls to the relatives of the deceased, to the people who lost their lives, and it's just incredibly heartbreaking. I mean, you've got, moms who are, mothers to very young children. You've got a dad who had a 1-year-old baby on the Army helicopter. We have to remember the human tragedy of this, because when Americans have tragedy, I think we can all come together, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, and just say, we love those folks, we're going to do right by them, and we're going to support them through what is, I think, the unspeakable tragedy of the last couple of days. But I do think that we also have to do a better job at the policy so that we make sure that aviation is as safe as it possibly can. Now, we haven't had an aviation accident like this in about 15, 20 years. We want to make sure that we try to never have an aviation accident like this again, or at least make them as minimal as possible. And that does, I think, mean that we have to talk about the DEI policies. Now, here's the specific way in which I think the DEI policies of the last administration, the Obama administration, contributed to where we are. We have a massive shortage of air traffic controllers. And in fact, there have been a number of lawsuits from people who would like to become air traffic controllers against the Obama and Biden administration, who were basically said, we were told not even to apply because of the color of our skin, because they were white people who wanted to be air traffic controllers, and under the DEI regime of the Biden administration, they weren't welcome. Well, what does that mean? Number one, it means that we don't have the best and the brightest sometimes in these positions, but even more importantly than that, even when we do get really good people, they're going to be way overstressed because they're working long hours, because air traffic controllers are short-staffed, and we have known going back years. I was on the Commerce Secretary, or the Commerce, I was on the Commerce Committee in the Senate. We knew for years that we had a shortage at air traffic control. Well, part of the reason why we had a shortage in air traffic control is because we were telling our air traffic controllers not to hire people because of the color of their skin. That is a scandal, and it is a scandal, thankfully, that is stopped under the leadership of President Trump. It's why I'm actually optimistic about aviation safety, but it's also why we've had way too many near misses and unfortunately a fatal crash just a couple days ago.
So, I mean, do you have any evidence that any of those hires that were there at the control Wednesday night were DEI hires?
So the president's been very clear about this. This is not saying that the person who was at the controls is a DEI hire, but let's just say, first of all, we should investigate everything, but let's just say the person at the controls didn't have enough staffing around him or her because we were turning people away because of DEI reasons. There is a very direct connection between the policies of the last administration and short-staffed air traffic controllers. That has to stop. And by the way, it's so funny to me, the media has picked up on this, not you, of course, Maria, but others have picked up on this. The president made very clear that he wasn't blaming anybody, but he was being very explicit about the fact that DEI policies have led our air traffic controllers to be short-staffed. That is a scandal. Thankfully, it's a scandal that the president has stopped.
Well, I mean, what can you do about it? Because you said we haven't had an accident like this in a long time. True,
sure.
But we've had a lot of near misses.
Yes, we have.
Right? We've had almost 1,000 near misses just recently. We're talking about 20-year-old traffic management systems, and they're responsible for detecting and managing landings at airports. Meanwhile, you've got companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon that have very sophisticated systems, and our allies are using those systems, like in the UK.
That's right. So there are two big issues here. Number one, most importantly, again, you've got to have the right people at air traffic control. Air traffic control is short-staffed, and I think the elimination of DEI hires and DEI policies will allow us actually to hire the air traffic controllers that we need. The software point is really important, though, because we know if you look at these old, antiquated air traffic control systems, it really does look like a video game that's 30 years old. We've got better software. We need a federal government that's more responsive to the technology that's out there, and I really do think that with President Trump's leadership, we're going to have those near misses and those almost terrible tragedies. Those are going to come down, which means our aviation system is going to be much safer.
Let me get into the cabinet nominations. You were the deciding vote on Pete Hegseth to confirm him for Defense Secretary. What can you tell us about these confirmation hearings? It certainly feels like even though the Republicans are in the majority, 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats, the Democrats are running the table. They're able to slow things down and obstruct. Is that right?
Well, they have been able to obstruct. I do think that Senator Thune deserves some credit for actually forcing the Senate to work on weekends and force some of these nominations through. Look, it's disappointing the Democrats are behaving like this, but we knew they were going to behave like this. We knew they were going to obstruct at every single opportunity that they could get. But so far, the president has a 100 batting average on these nominations. Some of them, the margins are a little bit closer. Some of them, the margins are a little bit better. But I feel very confident that we're going to be able to get the president's cabinet confirmed very quickly. Frankly, much more quickly than it happened in the first administration, because the president's really pushing on this. I think we have some better allies in the Senate than maybe the president had 8 years ago. So yeah, it's not always perfect, but I think the president's confirmation hearings are going much better than they were 8 years ago.
Do you expect to be the deciding vote on Tulsi Gabbard, on Kash Patel, on Bobby Kennedy Jr.?
Do I expect to? No, but I think there's a chance, right? And you always have to be ready for it, and that's, of course, part of the job of vice president. Obviously, if Tulsi, Bobby, or Kash need my vote as the tiebreaker, they will have it. I joked with Pete when I walked into the Senate chamber. I looked up at Pete's family, and then I looked at some of my Senate colleagues on the Republican side. I said, what do you think about this Pete Hegseth guy? But obviously, we're going to provide those votes if we need them. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that my tie-breaking vote isn't necessary. And Maria, I think there's such an important message to my fellow Republicans here. Look, you don't have to agree with everything Bobby Kennedy has ever said. You don't have to agree with everything that Tulsi Gabbard has ever said. You are meant to ask, do they have the qualifications and the character to do this job? The person who decides whether they should be nominated in the first place, he was the guy elected by the American people. That's President Trump. And he deserves some deference in surrounding himself with the people he thinks he needs to do the job.
I don't know if you're going to get it. We saw the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries already go out and tell his constituents, his friends, you have to fight like heck in the street to stop President Trump's agenda.
Yeah, these people remind me sometimes of the folks that were still fighting World War II on an isolated island like 30 years later. The American people have spoken. They are sick of the ridiculous performative politics. They want Americans, their leadership, Democrats and Republicans, to come together and actually get some things done. You don't have to agree with us on everything. Of course, if you're a Democrat, I'm sure you're going to vote a lot against what we're trying to do. But for Hakeem Jeffries to go out and say that you need to fight in the streets, it's dangerous, it's disgraceful rhetoric, and it's not at all what the American people ask. I think if you went to Hakeem Jeffries' district and took the people that voted against President Trump, not even the people who voted for him, the people who voted against President Trump, do you want a congressional Democratic leadership that fights in the streets or that makes your life better? Most people think the government exists to make their life better, not show up on TV, criticize the president, and not actually get anything done.
Absolutely. Once we get through the hearings for the confirmation process, you will begin the work on executing your agenda, President Trump's agenda. What role will you have specifically in that?
You know, I play the role that the president needs me to play, right? Whether it's casting the tie-breaking vote or maybe talking to some of my old Senate colleagues about the importance of voting on this nomination, meeting with the Speaker of the House about some of the details of the legislation. I sort of see my job as an all-around player. You know, when I played Pee Wee football, you would sometimes get a trophy, Mr. All-Around, for the kids who played offense and defense. I just have to serve the role that the president needs me to serve in order to facilitate his agenda. You know, the thing that I always remind people, both the White House staff, the congressional leadership, is the president's success is the country's success. And to the extent that we can help the president implement his agenda, that's going to mean more jobs, that's going to mean higher take-home pay, that's going to mean more people able to raise a family in a stable home in a secure neighborhood. Like, the agenda is clear. We just have to go get it done. I'm going to play whatever role the president needs me to play.
Oh, well, the president said these tariffs will go into effect tomorrow.
Yep.
25% on Canada and Mexico, 10% on China. Are you expecting retaliation?
We'll see what happens, but I think, unfortunately, the retaliation has already happened. The problem with this whole idea that they're going to retaliate is they have already been taking advantage of America for decades. The retaliation is Donald Trump saying no more. We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore, and I think it's important the president is doing what he's doing. Now, look, it looks different ways and comes in different forms, whether you're talking about Canada or China or Mexico. We know that Mexico has allowed the facilitation of the illegal drug trade and illegal sex trafficking for years and has done nothing about it. If they want to be a better partner to us, the time starts now. We know the Chinese, of course, have stolen American manufacturing jobs for 30, 40 years, and also that they've facilitated the trafficking of illegal fentanyl into Mexico, where the drug cartels then bring it into our country. We are sick of being taken advantage of. We still have, thank God, the biggest economy in the entire world, the best people and the best workers, but the message from President Trump to the entire world is very clear. We are done being taken advantage of, and we have a president who looks out for the interests of American citizens. Thank God we do, and we're going to try to do it the best we can.
I'm glad you mentioned China, because it seems like Silicon Valley is just over the moon over China's DeepSeek AI program. Sure. Do you believe it really cost $5.5 million to develop, or are those fake numbers? And do you believe they stole intellectual property to actually get to the advanced place they are in this?
Well, we know they steal intellectual property all the time. That's a given. Now, whether they spent $5.5 million to actually train the model, Maria, I'm very skeptical of this. I'm by no means an AI expert, though I do know the tech sector pretty well. The smartest people that I know in artificial intelligence actually think that they probably spent hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars to train the model. And the model that they have is still actually not as good as some of the best American technology. But what it should serve, Maria, is as a wake-up call. The Chinese are going to spend the money. They're going to try to do as much as they can to catch up to us. This is why we need presidential leadership from President Trump to unleash America's innovators. We've never had the most populous country in the world. We've never had the biggest country in the world. What has made America so powerful is that we've had the best workers and the best technology anywhere in the world. We have to stay ahead of the curve, or we're going to lose our power on the world stage. That's something the president's very committed to not letting happen.
So what can the administration do about pushing back on communist China? I mean, the president made a remark the other day that, look, it's not just TikTok. You've got surveillance in your own phone if it's made in China. You've got surveillance everywhere. I mean, we've got, spy balloons from China, surveillance, propaganda, undermining the United States at every turn. What are you going to do about it?
Well, first, we're going to impose some tariffs. And I think the president's been very clear about that. The tariffs are in some ways a penalty for the Chinese taking advantage of America's economy, for sending drugs into our country. They have to actually face some consequences for doing what they've done now for 20, 30, 40 years to our country, Maria. And part of what the tariffs do is they allow the president to have a negotiation with the Communist Chinese Party about actually having a little bit more of a balanced relationship. Whereas we used to have one where the Chinese stole our jobs, took advantage of us, stole our intellectual property, and sent a lot of crap into our country like illegal drugs. We now actually want to have a much more balanced relationship with the Chinese, but that's going to require, I think, the Chinese to face some consequences. So there are ways to fight back. We're starting to do that now, and we're going to keep on doing it over the next 4 years.
Well, you've got lofty goals in the agenda, obviously from the border to defense spending to the economic part of it as well. This week, the House of Representatives had their annual meeting in Florida. They went there with the goal of finding $2.5 to $3 trillion in spending cuts,
sure,
offsets to this incredible agenda. They could not even come up with $300 billion in offsets. How will you pay for all of this?
Well, first of all, we've got Elon Musk and our friends at Doge who are working very hard to find a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in government. Think about this math, Maria. In 2019, the U.S. government spent $4.4 trillion. In 2024, it spent $6.5 trillion. There is a lot of waste and a lot of fraud, and that additional $2.1 trillion of spending. We are committed to getting America back on a sustainable fiscal pathway. Part of that, we really think the president believes, is the tariff equation. Part of that is cutting spending significantly, especially the wasteful bureaucrats. And part of that is growing the economy, because we've had anemic growth under Joe Biden. If we grow the economy at a bigger rate under President Trump's leadership, and I believe that we will, that is how you solve the debt problem in the United States of America. We've got to do all three of them, and we're committed to doing it.
Do you think you can get back to pre-COVID level spending? I mean, is it time to start cutting into the mandatory spending?
So, first of all, the mandatory spending number includes, of course, Social Security and Medicare, which the president has committed that he's going to protect for our seniors. It also includes some programs that have nothing to do with Social Security and Medicare. And certainly, we're going to look at all of these programs, protect people's benefits, but make sure that we're being a good steward of America's tax money. That's an important part of our job. But if you talk about just the COVID trend line of 2019, that $2 trillion increase, that was not mostly mandatory spending. That was frankly Congress and the Biden administration not doing their job. There's a lot that we can do with just common sense fiscal reform, empowering our friends to find the cuts that they need, and growth. That's what we're going to focus on over the next few years.
So you can cut into mandatory spending because it's not actually mandatory spending.
Well, it's funny. People hear mandatory spending and they assume it's Social Security and Medicare. Again, the president wants to protect Social Security and Medicare. There's a lot of waste across our government, and it's something that we're certainly trying to look into.
Coming up, newly confirmed EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin is here. But first, President Trump's bold ideas on Greenland and the Panama Canal as Secretary of State Marco Rubio takes his first international trip to Panama this weekend. Vice President JD Vance on foreign policy and whether the VP is planning to follow in Trump's footsteps and run for president in 4 years. That's next. The president has so many bold ideas, from the possibility of acquiring Greenland, putting up this Iron Dome in America, taking back the Panama Canal, renaming the Gulf to the Gulf of America. Do you expect the U.S. to acquire Greenland?
I think it's possible, Maria. So here's the thing that I think a lot of folks don't appreciate about Greenland. It's really important to our national security. There are sea lanes there that the Chinese use, that the Russians use, that frankly, Denmark, which controls Greenland, it's not doing its job and it's not being a good ally. So you have to ask yourself, how are we going to solve that problem, solve our own national security? If that means that we need to take more territorial interest in Greenland, that is what President Trump is going to do, because he doesn't care about what the Europeans scream at us. He cares about putting the interests of America's citizens first. There's another angle to this whole Greenland thing, Maria, that people don't realize. You've got probably 55,000 people living on Greenland who are not actually happy with Danish government. They've got great natural resources there. They've got an incredibly bountiful country that the Danes aren't letting them develop and explore. Of course, Donald Trump would take a different approach if he was the leader of Greenland.
And the odds of the Panama Canal?
Well, look, Panama Canal, they've violated a core tenet of the agreement. Remember, when we gave over, and I think it was a mistake, but when we gave over the Panama Canal to the country of Panama, what we said is you have to make sure that this canal respects American sovereignty and that you don't give special benefits to the Chinese that you don't give to the United States of America. I think they've failed to meet their end of the bargain, and we're very serious about making sure they do meet their end of the bargain.
You're one of the youngest vice presidents that we've ever seen in the history of our country. Are you expecting to run for president in 3.5 years?
Oh, Maria, you're the first person who's asked me that. And I'd say that we've not thought a lot about politics in the last 6 months. We've thought about getting the American people's business done. We'll see what happens come 2028. But the way that I think about this is the best thing for my future is actually the best thing for the American people, which is that we do a really good job over the next 3.5 years. So we'll cross the political bridge when we come to it. I'm not thinking about running for president. I'm thinking about doing a good job for the American people. And I think the best way to do that is to make sure that President Trump is a success.
And how important is it to bring young people into the political conversation?
So huge, so important. And I think that's certainly one of the things, one of the responsibilities that I take seriously. I've got a 7-year-old, an almost 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old kid at home. I do think I view America's political problems from the perspective of a young father, because that's exactly what I am. So I definitely try to bring that perspective into the Oval Office and meetings on Capitol Hill. That's an important role for me to play, and I'll keep on playing it.
And I love that. You're a family man. And one of the first executive orders that President Trump signed in was school choice.
Yes.
And so we talk about education. Do you have a vision there in terms of how things should look for your children as they grow up? You're talking about killing or shutting down the education department to save costs. So what does the education look like?
Well, I think we could save costs and actually give American children a better education. We spend way more per pupil on on education than almost any country in the world, and we've gotten worse and worse outcomes. I think the president's exactly right that if you give parents more choice and more capacity to choose what's in the best interest of their kids, then we're going to make education better for all American children. It's really weird to me, actually, that so many politicians, they send their kids to private schools, but then they want to deny that opportunity to the families of poor children or middle-class children. My attitude is anything that's good enough for my kids, I want to give all Americans those opportunities, and that's exactly what the president's school choice policy aims to do.
Mr. VP, are you going to Ohio on Monday? Can you tell us about your trip? You're going to be with Lee Zeldin?
Yeah, the plan is, so Lee Zeldin, our great new EPA administrator and just a dear friend. I really love Lee, so we'll have a good time. But we're actually going to go and visit the East Palestine train derailment. And it matters a lot to me personally because my first month as a United States Senator, you had this terrible train disaster. I'll be going back a couple years later as the Vice President of the United States, and really just to check in on how the cleanup is going. The big question that I had as a senator is people would always ask, is the water clean to drink? Is the air clean to breathe? And luckily, we now have a great EPA administrator who I think can answer those questions and fix the problems on the ground. We're just going to go do a little fact finding, talk to people, and see what's happening.
That was incredible. When you put the stick in the water, when you were
Yeah.
a senator and you showed us exactly what had occurred, I was grateful that you did that. Thank you for that and telling the country really what had taken place. Look, I know it's only been 11 days, 12, 13 days as Vice President, but can you give us some observations? What's it like? How are you doing?
Look, I'm doing great. It's the coolest job I've ever had, and it's an honor to serve. It's hard not to pinch yourself when you walk into the Oval Office. I was raised by a woman who didn't graduate from high school, much less from college, and here I am going to the Oval Office with the President of the United States. My kids are really happy that the family has adjusted to this very well. And look, I'm learning a lot, actually, about the President's leadership, about the way that he takes input and opinions from many different people. It's making me, I think, a better leader myself. And it's just something that I try to remind myself, it's a blessing to have this job. I got to do as good of a job by the American people as I possibly can.